This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of NCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 182. Nick Maxon and Noah Grant here for another episode in the den. And Nick, our final preview, thank the Lord. Yeah. 16 of 16, and one that we're actually really excited to do. Of course, they got action first underway here this past weekend. That is the St. Cloud State men's hockey team. We have them coming in at number 2 in the NCHC to round out our standings. And Nick, obviously not the only team in action. Women's hockey team was also in what was maybe not the biggest dogfight, at least on paper, and it ended up becoming one very quickly over the course of the weekend. I would say if you were a Huskies fan, you got 4 great hockey games out of this, all things considered. So,
well, it depends on which lens you're looking at that through, Noah.
Well, good thing Huskies fans have always been mild-mannered and reserved. But with us being mild-mannered and reserved, I suppose before we jump into the show, we are recording tonight on Monday, October 9th. This is a significant date, I was informed.
Shut up.
AARP has called and informed us that one of our own is now a year older. Mr. Nick Maxon, happy birthday. I believe it is...
The number doesn't matter.
It's in the 30s.
It's in there. It's still in the 30s, so we'll leave it at that. But no, thank you. I appreciate that. Got a chance to go out and golf. You know, I don't get to do that often because sometimes there's already snow on the ground and it's way too cold. And think about this, Noah. Last Monday, it was in the mid to upper 80s.
Oh, yeah.
In the Twin Cities. Today, a little bit more seasonal. It was in the mid 50s, a little bit of a northwest wind. And had a really good time with a good buddy of mine hitting 18 holes of golf and actually played pretty well, all things considered. So very good day. Again, good to have it off and able to enjoy it a bit. So thank you. Again, thank you to all the listeners as well. So yeah, as you can see, you can probably sense the multitude of excitement in my voice when this day comes around. So,
well, if you want to talk about multitude of excitement, if memory serves me correctly, the schedule's lined up. I don't know if it's confirmed yet, but I believe, even though it might not be for show purposes, I believe not this weekend, but I believe next weekend we might actually end up crossing paths with each other.
It's true. It will happen. Yep.
Well, I can sense the excitement in your voice with that too. Okay. Anyway, moving on. No, St. Cloud Norsemen do visit the Minot Minotauros at the Pepsi Rink at Mesa Arena in about a week and change. So that'll be good. I'm guessing you're probably traveling with the team, so I don't think we'll have a recording together as far as that's concerned. But we'll see each other and we'll mention it, and people will go, okay, and.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, which is usually maybe how our shows go. But without further ado, we won't hold things up anymore here on episode 182. We will start with Center Ice View News and Notes presented by HuskiesIllustrated.com and the Soda Pod. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to CenterIceView.com. Welcome into the main portion of the show. Nick Maxon, Noah Grant, episode 182. Nick, and I think we're going to start on the women's side here. This will kind of be a little bit more akin to how our show is going to go. We'll kind of do like a recap or a roundup, so to speak, of the WCHA. We'll talk about the St. Cloud women's team specifically. Do the same thing for the men's team. Only difference is this week we do have our final preview in the men's hockey team. We'll tack on to the end of this one too. So might be a little bit more in-depth and fleshed out when we go in the coming weeks as far as our roundups and recaps of other things, but might be a bit abbreviated, at least for teams outside of St. Cloud for both conferences, at least for this week. But Nick, women's hockey team getting underway. Actually, they were the first group to get underway for the Huskies. Of course, they played Friday, Saturday. So they enter in the weekend against Mercyhurst, and, you know, on paper, Mercyhurst maybe not the strongest team, or so we thought. And then we were kind of reminded that, hey, maybe they actually might be good at hockey. So before we get to that, though, other roundups on Friday. So I should say on Thursday, Wisconsin played Boston College and they beat them 5-3 on the women's side. On Friday, the Huskies did play as well as Minnesota. Minnesota only beating RIT 3-0. I thought that was, I don't know who played.
You're blowing the dust off.
Interesting score, I guess. St. Thomas 4-3 victory over Lindenwood, tight hockey game there. Duluth throttled LIU 6-0. Bemidji State and RPI went to overtime, and it was 1-1. I can't remember who got the decisive victory in that one. Mankato in Sacred Heart beat Sacred Heart 9-0, and Wisconsin beat BC 12-2, which is a stark contrast from the day before. So.
Yeah. A little bit.
LIU did not score at all on the weekend against Duluth. 4-0 was the score on Saturday. RPI ended up beating Bemidji 3-1 on Saturday as well. 5-1 score Gophers and RIT. 7-2 St. Thomas over Lindenwood, a much stronger showing for them in the second night of that series. And Sacred Heart only was able to tack on one goal. Mankato had 7 in that matchup. So, but our St. Cloud State Huskies, Friday, October 6th, they got underway against Mercyhurst at Mercyhurst Ice Center in Erie, Pennsylvania. 220 people in attendance. Shots 26-16 in favor of Mercyhurst, but a couple of markers very early on within the first 5 minutes at the 3:30 and 4:13 mark. It was Mariel Parks had both goals, a 5-on-3 and power play goal. Special teams came back to bite the Huskies early. They could not recover despite essentially doubling up on shots almost through periods 2 and periods 3. Huskies went 0-for-6 on the power play. Mercyhurst 2-for-4, as we just mentioned. St. Cloud was less than 50% in the faceoff dot. In that was JoJo Chobak. She stopped 14 of 16 for the Huskies. Anya Nystrom was perfect, 26 of 26. Did this box score catch you off guard, or did we feel like they were going to handle Mercyhurst better? You listened to Brian Idalski's comments about this game, and he kind of seemed to allude that, you know what, we got off to a slow start. We played well after the first 5 minutes, but it just wasn't enough, and we ran into good goaltending.
Yeah, and I think, you know, not having Taylor Lind in the lineup too shows you how important she is to this roster on both sides of the puck, right? She's a catalyst for the offense, and certainly, you know, a very good, responsible defensive forward too when it comes to, and you and I have talked about this last year, right? Idalski, both of those goals, you know, you mentioned the power play. That's one thing that he really takes pride on is the penalty kill. And, over the past couple of weeks, and when I say past couple, meaning they've only played 2 weekends, mind you, it's had a day off or a week off. He mentioned the slower starts also in the first weekend, and how it took them a little bit to get going. And this is what can happen, right? You know, is when you get to these better matchups, or more so if you get into penalty trouble early and you're still trying to get your legs under you, sometimes you get yourself into a hole. And you start to chase the game, right? And then that puts you as the opposing, especially the away team, in a bit of a tough spot, right? Because not only do you have first change, you should say, but you also just can't find your rhythm too. It seemed like that's kind of how it was on Friday, and Mercyhurst is sort of strangle the Huskies offensively. And again, as you mentioned, even though they had a decent shot volume, probably not as many grade A chances as they were looking for, and unfortunately fell 2-0. So again, you got a next man up mentality. Again, Leyland is important, but she wasn't in the lineup, and just again too bad that the Huskies didn't get off going right away and end up biting them and taking the loss in return.
Yeah, curious to see how good Mercyhurst is going to be this season. Maybe they are a bit stronger than we thought they were going to be on paper, too. So, that could be a piece of it as well. Emma Gentry and CC Bowlby paced the Huskies with 4 shots apiece. Gentry was the best face-off person for the Huskies over the aggregate. Clara Himlerova was 3 for 6. She struggled a little bit in the dot on the other side of things to kind of give you an idea of where we were at, respectively. Second night, October 7th on Saturday, so a traditional Friday-Saturday matchup for the women's program. 135 was the attendance on Saturday night. Huskies improve to 3-1. The only goal of the game coming on a 5-on-3 man advantage from the aforementioned Emma Gentry, her third of the season. Grace Wolf, and I always butcher this name, Nick, so I'm going to need your help. Is it Alice Surreal?
Alice Surreal.
Surreal, yeah, there we go.
Surreal, yep.
Yeah, a bit surreal how much I can't handle names most of the time. With that being said, Huskies put up a 19-3 shots in period number 1 in this hockey game. Goal coming at the 19-17 mark at the tail end of the first period. So hard work definitely rewarded. They hang on despite being outshot in period number 2, 17-9, and they outshoot Mercyhurst by 1, 9-8 for a 37-28 total in favor of St. Cloud. Huskies go 1 for 7 on the power play. Lone marker was the one that counted. Mercyhurst 0 for 2 on the man advantage. Huskies really struggling, though, Nick. 26 face-off wins, 38 face-off losses. So, again, something that we kind of talked about last season that seemed to kind of depend on the opponent. You got to have possession of the puck when you start hockey games, and St. Cloud struggling in that department. Laura Zimmerman, Emma Gentry, and CC Bowlby all had 5 shots apiece. Clara Himlerova, great response for her. She had 6 shots in this hockey game, went 8 for 10 in the faceoff dot. Emma Gentry was the reverse. They actually flipped. She was 3 for 12 in the dot in this one. So a little bit of work may be needed. Everybody else was about 500 or better. So, as far as goaltending wise, it was Sonia Hola that got the call. She was perfect, 28 for 28. Anya Nystrom, again, her second night of action, she stops 35 of 36, which most nights should win you a hockey game. But the Huskies, a bit of a gritty victory for them, improving to 3-1 on Saturday.
Yeah, and you talk about the shot totals, 1 for 7 on power plays. You wonder how many of those shots were coming on the man advantage to Noah. So face-offs, early in the season, that's something that, it takes sometimes a little bit of a while to get into a groove. And again, Mercyhurst seemed like this has been an area that they sort of, focused in on during the offseason because, as you mentioned, throughout the weekend, they were really good in the dot. And again, you don't want to keep repeating that, Taylor Lynn's absence, it is a hole you have to fill either way. But I think for St. Cloud, again, 1 for 7. So that means they were skating around. They were drawing penalties, right? A lot of the penalty calls that we see were stick and fraction type penalties. So that means you're chasing, you're defending a bit, right? So, it's, and maybe if you're Brian Idalski in the fan base, you'd like to see more of those power plays be capitalized, right? But again, it's early in the year. It's only, games 3 and 4 at the end of it. I think a much better response game, again, as you mentioned, certainly looked like they got to their game a little bit earlier and, barring, 5-on-5 and certainly those extra skater type, moments. I think a pretty overall good game against Sonia Hole. I think that's her second shutout already this season, as I called her first one of the season already. It cuts a couple of weeks ago. So much better look on Saturday. And now it gets to the grind of the WCHA this weekend. And yours truly will be up in St. Cloud to see all the action, which will be kind of fun.
Yeah, it should be a good matchup. Again, like you mentioned, maybe a bit of some bus legs too. The Huskies, the women's team has a week off too, right? So, you get a tough first 5 minutes. Unfortunately, on the bright side, by the way, former Husky Olivia Savard was limited to 2 shots over the course of the weekend for Mercyhurst. I would say name of the weekend award, though, probably goes to Mercyhurst skater Mary Sweetapple, by the way. That just sounds like doesn't that sound like a cookie brand or some sort of commercial licensing product in the making?
Sounds like a apple that the University of Minnesota would like genetically modify and sell.
Definitely. So Huskies improved to 3-1. They sweep Union 2 weeks ago by a 10-1 combined score. In the aggregate, outscored 2-1 in the weekend, but a 1-0 victory on Saturday sees them with that advantage. Like Nick mentioned, next weekend they will be hosting Bemidji State on Friday and Saturday, and then we'll be actually pushing our show out when they play again. They play on the 17th on that Tuesday, so we'll have 3 games to recap after that, a couple of non-conference games after they see the Gophers on that Tuesday. So a bit of a tightly scrunched schedule for the women's program. Keep an eye on that. They've got an opponent in Bemidji State who will be a good first little test, a good opener out of the gate, and hopefully a team on paper, at least we're thinking that they should handle, but you never know in the WCHA and college hockey. They're going to have to bring their A game for their first WCHA action, first conference action on home ice as well too, Nick. I guess before we flip it over to the men's side, anything that you take away from Mercyhurst as you get ready to head back to the Granite City?
They held the Huskies in check for the most part, right? I think goaltending, as you mentioned, was sort of, one of the things that stood out for them is, they didn't just go away quietly, right? They still, battled St. Cloud. And I think this is a good, precursor to the WCHA schedule where, every shift, every puck battle is going to be one that you're going to have to go in 100% effort and come out, try to, essentially execute. So at the end of it, Mercyhurst, as we mentioned before, maybe not the strongest or shall we say the scariest team, but it looks like they have, almost a little bit of Huskies of last year in them, right? Just trying to grind it out and see if you can't maybe capitalize on a mistake. And for the Huskies, again, it's a good lesson learned. I think you take away a couple of things again in the face-off dot. There's some areas of improvement there. Definitely starting at the drop of the puck and not trying to take 5 or 6 minutes, and knowing so that in game number 2, right, if you get to your game, you're drawing a lot of calls, right? Again, that's a lot of it from your skating and from your creativity in the offensive zone. So a lot of positives. Again, you can clean some of the things up, and it's not like they got blown out, 2-0, just really couldn't get your game going. You're going to have those happen. It's, trying to limit those. And I think, again, they're ready for their first tests, Bemidji State coming up next weekend. So overall, I think a pretty good weekend. Just a couple of things that they're going to go back on film and try to improve for this weekend. Yeah.
And I felt good about the fact that it seemed like the players who are high-end players, quote unquote, the relied on top 6, top pairing, whoever it may be for St. Cloud, even if the results weren't there necessarily score sheet wise, they played well for the most part, and they showed up when they needed to, and you're leading by example. So I think this women's team should be just fine. Should be an interesting matchup. Nick will have the recap for us after they see Bemidji in the upcoming weekend. On the men's side, we move over to the NCHC, of course, as is prototypical with men's hockey. They are still well in non-conference and exhibition play for a lot of these teams throughout the first month and a half of the season. So we're going to try to sort through the games. Of course, college hockey, quote unquote, unofficially got started with Arizona State playing their club affiliate brother in arms, Arizona, and 16-0 was the final for that one. So anyway, did we get Minot State vibe precursor vibes already?
Oh boy.
Anyway, as far as exhibition and non-conference, we're going to start with Saturday. I'm going through the list because I don't have them sorted by NCHC. So, of course, Western Michigan played the U.S. under-18 team. They win 9-4 in that one. So that was a true exhibition in and of itself. And then it was actually Omaha for the second year in a row. They beat Mankato, this time 1-0, but it is considered an exhibition game. It does, from what I understand, does not count.
Correct.
As far as pairwise standings, I don't know why the Mavs do this to themselves. And then Colorado College beat Simon Fraser 6-3. But Nick, this UNO team, man, I mean, if you're going to go in and do the job.
Yeah. I mean, they were kind of as advertised, right? Not necessarily the most prolific offensive threat, but sort of just a grind down. And, this Maverick team, you're talking Minnesota State, right? It's just still a lot of question marks of who and what we might see out of them, right? I don't expect, kind of like what Brett Larson did when he took over for Bob Moskow, right? You never want to reinvent the wheel, especially overnight. You're going to see probably a lot of the same systems, a lot of the same emphasis on defense. And at the end of the day, with the rule change, was it 2 years ago, I believe, just before the start of last year, when they made it, shall we say, eligible for NCAA opponents to play each other for exhibitions. Before it was a Canadian club. And at the end of it, I think you and I will be on the same page as, although that's kind of fun and all because it's a win, it's a confidence builder. Not the best, shall we say, hockey in terms of what you can do for a college team. So I don't mind it. But definitely, if you're going to try to get the rust off the proverbial blades, why not, throw a couple of teams that don't normally see each other very often, do it for once. And then it's a little bit more of a gooder, better evaluation for the coaches and the players. And, the tape will be a much better one to review that following Monday and Tuesday. So I don't mind it, but Omaha has them by the number apparently in this little series.
You know who will be keeping note? It will be St. Cloud State. They have Mankato next week. So, yeah, keep an eye for a multitude of reasons. I think as we go through this segment too, throughout the year too, the one thing we may do on the men's side as well too is maybe just a very short abbreviated national scoreboard look as well too, because there are some scores that pop up outside of the NCHC that might be
maybe the top 16, maybe the pairwise. That would, I think that'd be fine.
Yeah, I think one of them that stood out, Notre Dame lost to Clarkson, and it was a bad day for Big Ten. Michigan also lost to Providence on that opening night non-conference wise. So those are pairwise standings games, by the way. Quinnipiac, the defending national champions, also lost to BC as well too. Mm-hmm. So something to keep. But Wisconsin won a hockey game, so there's that against Augustana, who had the Augsburg logo, according to certain websites. As far as other NCHC teams, let me scroll down the list here. I know that, Denver played Alaska. They win 7-3 against Fairbanks. And then it was a 2-2 overtime finish unofficially between Tech and Duluth. This was a very good matchup that kind of went back and forth both ways. And I'm trying to remember, I think this one just finished in a tie, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I can't see anything from the box score here, and I obviously did not watch it myself. So, but yeah, Duluth and Tech both nights kind of seem to go back and forth. So, the Bulldogs and Tech 2-2 was the score, and that one, Nick might be rustling out some scores for us as we speak. On Saturday night, Michigan got redemption against Providence, out of conference, by the way. Notre Dame did as well. Miami got their first win. They lost the previous night. I missed this one. They lost 5-4 in overtime to Ferris State. They win the second night 5-2. So Miami, their first win of the season in non-conference action. They go 1-0-1 to start the season. Denver beating Fairbanks 5-2. And I'm trying to see. The Gophers ended up winning this weekend too, but nobody cares about that. And Quinnipiac played Northeastern to a tie as well too. So nothing else really notable on Sunday, I should say. I keep saying Saturday. Used to the normal weekend. It's actually Sunday that these games went on. So only other thing that we have to talk about is our St. Cloud State Huskies on the men's side. Their first action, we get our first look at the team. Again, one of these that if you go back historically, and by historically I mean about a year or two, because that's about all we've got. Yep. Maybe the casual Husky fan probably would have said, oh, they should have taken care of St. Thomas, this and that, which they played St. Thomas tight in certain games in the past. I think before we get into the box score, Nick, I think over the course of the weekend, it's fair to say that this St. Thomas team might be in the running for maybe a home spot in the CCHA, potentially, the way they played this weekend. I mean, we're very early, but they're not a bad hockey team. I think that
small sample size, right? And I think that's fair, but it's also fair to point out that they had a bunch of transfers come in, and these are transfers that have multiple years of Division I college hockey experience. Noah Prokop, who comes in from Colorado College, same with Matthew Gleason, coming over from CC. Those are two, shall we say, more forward prospects that have, at least 2 years of experience between the two. And, Matthew Gleason, a Cretin-Derham Hall kid who, he's got some skill, right? Was looking for a bigger role down in CC and just, wasn't going to fit the bill. So he transfers up to St. Thomas. And this is where we figured, and I remember talking about this 2 years ago, give Rico Blasi 2 to 3 years. You're going to start to see the results of the fruits of his labor, essentially, right? Granted, again, it's 2 games, but this team made the Huskies work, right, for 60 minutes. This is not a pushover team. And, it's sort of the same mentality that I think Huskies fans have to a team like Miami, like when somehow the Huskies lose to Miami, and it's not that, Miami's the best team in the world. Sure, they're not great, but they're still a Division I college hockey team with still some decent talent to them, right? And you catch, the Huskies on the right day, and maybe some bounces go your way. Any team can beat anybody in any given day, right? That's not what this was, though. St. Thomas was neck for neck with St. Cloud this weekend. I think the scoreboards themselves, just on the surface, tell a lot of that. But while watching these games, and I want to get your input on this, again, this team is leaps and bounds, more advanced than they were just 2 years ago when they were just playing their first ever Division I weekend. Pretty incredible rise. And to answer your question, I think there's a chance there, right? Now, granted, when you get to conference play, I still think Bowling Green, despite some of the things that they're dealing with, is going to be a tough test. I think Northern Michigan, also Michigan Tech is up there. So there's some potential there. There could be, a little bit of a jam there. I think Mankato too isn't going to be as bad as other people think that they will be. But I think it's possibly there, right? I think there is a possibility that they can challenge for a home playoff spot. The question is, and I think this is where we go to last year, right? And I'll try to keep this as concise as I can. There were games that they felt like they could have won, but then lost last year. Right? There's a lot of disgruntled St. Thomas fans, including the head coach Rico Blasi, that really felt like they probably should have had more than they did. They started to turn things around in the second half. So it's consistency with the squad, right? That's going to be the key. And can they do it more in that first, essentially, half of the year prior to the holiday break and not rely on a second half surge? If they can do that, there definitely is a chance we could see them compete for a home ice position in the CCHA playoffs. It's there. It's wide open.
Yeah, certainly. And I think you have to feel, if you're a St. Thomas or St. Cloud State fan, you have to feel okay with how the weekend went as a whole. I mean, there was a lot of pushback back and forth. I definitely think special teams is going to be a topic of conversation for both clubs as they move forward. 13 combined penalties in the first one. St. Thomas goes 2 for 7. Huskies were 3 for 3 to start the game, ended up finishing 4 for 6 on the man advantage. So you got to feel good about that on the offensive side of things. Huskies outshoot St. Thomas 37-30. Final score, St. Thomas 5, St. Cloud 4 in overtime in this one. Huskies were 67% in the faceoff dot. They were 37 for 55. So St. Cloud actually...
Not a great... shall I say, defensive outing there for the overtime goal. It's a little overcommitment there from Kupka.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, right? And you got to give St. Thomas tip of their hat, right? They saw it, especially that weak side forward, and came in with layers. It was a well-executed play, and Bassi didn't have a chance. And, unfortunately, if you start taking up space in 3-on-3 overtime and not, taking your man, that's what can happen. So,
we'll get there. A lot of scoring before that. Yes. Huskies actually lead 2-1 after the first. Tie game would have been 3-3 after the second period. And then, of course, 4-4 heading into overtime. And St. Thomas gets the victory. Interesting conversation, Nick, to start. As far as we were curious to see what the lineup card was going to look like. We talked a little bit about guys that we expected to make the jump, guys that we expected to maybe whatever. And we had an interesting conversation of a young kid by the name of Barrett Hall. And we wondered how his translation was going to move from where he was coming from into where he was. Well, he slotted into a top 6 role. And I think we figured out the kid can play. Adam Ingram and Zach Okabe rounding out that second line. Top 6 was Kyler Kupka, Mason Sahlquist getting the start on that top line, and Vieti Mietinen. So a bit of a different look. It seems to me, as I look at the rest of the forward card, Grant Ashawn with Werner Mietinen and Jack Rogers, Joey Molinar, Jack Ryman, and Nick Ports rounding out the forward group here. It seems to me, at least through maybe the top 6 or the top 9, that Brett Larson is very partial to having what I would say at least one good 200-foot player on each line. Yep. And someone who's very defensively responsible, and then 2 guys that have a good mix of speed, skill, talent, that are a little bit more offensive minded, that can kind of play that game. So did you kind of get that sense? And also Barrett Hall, who opened the scoring in this hockey game, by the way, on the power play, 241 in from Vieti Mietinen and Dylan Anhorn on the back end. Kid can play.
Seattle draft pick, right? How about this? Barrett Hall, I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Media Day and how Brett Larson was raving about the ability of Barrett Hall and how he was probably the most impressive freshman, and certainly earned a top 6 spot, right? And then you talk Mason Salquist, right? Brett Larson has nothing but praise for the little bulldog that can, right? And I say that with, praise and not as a negative thing. The kid is a scrappy forward. Also really good on the draws. He thinks that Salquist is one of their better, face-off centermen, essentially. He probably wishes he was a little bit bigger to be a center, but at the end of the day, he's got that kind of gritty mentality too, especially when you're playing on a line with Vidi Mietnin. We've talked about, shall we say the game that he plays and the game that, shall we say, he does not play, right? So I think that Salquist and Vidi, sort of as a nice mix with each other. I did ask Brett that would they ever put Werner and Vidi on the same line. You wouldn't say yes or no, but I'm sure that if it came down to it, they probably would. But I do like that top 6. I do like the versatility of it. And like you said, good mix of skill. I think grit's also got to be there, right? You got to have a guy that can go and win the puck battles. And then you do have a distributor, and then you do have a finisher in each line, right? You do have some balance, which I think the Huskies were missing the past couple of seasons.
You know what I also like? You like the top 6. I like the bottom 6 too. I think there's a good mix too of guys who are defensively responsible, like that fourth line, Molinar, Ryman, Nick Ports. What a gritty, heavy line there. I really like that. Now, here's an interesting question for you, Nick, before we get into the scorecard. We haven't even gotten there yet. Speaking of a couple of guys, 2 Huskies outpaced the rest of their counterparts in terms of shots on goal. Who were they, and how many shots did they have on the opening night on Saturday?
One's going to be Anhorn.
Anhorn is correct. Dylan Anhorn was second. He had 5 shots.
And I would guess Vidi also.
How many shots did Vieti Miettinen have?
7.
He had 9.
Oh, haha.
He had 9 shots, had a 3-point night, a goal and 2 assists for him. Dylan Anhorn, 1 and 1 for 2 respectively. So, boys came to play. The result is this was a kind of a war of attrition a little bit. A lot of special teams back and forth. Say what you want about the penalty calls, but I mean, you have 2 goals for St. Thomas that end up being at even strength in some capacity. Every other goal in this hockey game, besides the 3-on-3 overtime goal, was either on the man advantage with an extra attacker or both. So as far as that's concerned, like we mentioned, Barrett Hall opens the scoring. Then about 2 minutes later, Jake Brasini got back for St. Thomas. Huskies finish off period number 1. Dylan Anhorn, his first of the season, second point of the game already on the power play from Vieti Miettinen, 2 assists for him already in period number 1. Adam Ingram, the secondary assist just before the 14-minute mark. Dylan Anhorn, I thought, unsurprisingly to this point, had a great weekend, but good to see him in his first official return to action play as well as he did. Cam Recchi, just before the 10-minute mark in period number 2, got us tied up at 2. Huskies respond in the power play 2.5 minutes later. Zach Okabe's first of the year. Expect a lot of those, I would say, over the course of the season. Yes. Mason Salquist, Nick Port's gritty power play goal to get the Huskies back in front before Luke Manning on the power play as well, right before the period ends in period number 2 to make us all lined up at 3 apiece. And then Matthew Gleason, the former Colorado College Tiger, actually him and Noah Prokop, were on the same line together on that second unit for St. Thomas. He gets a power play marker as well. 5 minutes into period number 3, Huskies fans a bit on edge until the 11.5-minute mark. Vieti Miettinen's first of the year on the power play. Jack Peart, his first point of the season, of course, and Werner, his brother, assisting on Vieti's first goal of the season. And then, of course, like you mentioned, Nick, 1:11 into overtime. Ryder Donovan, beautiful tic-tac-toe play. Couple of Huskies caught puck watching, moving to essentially the first pass that was made upon zone entry. Secondary flow comes in the back door, and my dead grandma probably could have hit that wide open net. I mean, it was a beautiful play. There's no doubt about it. If you're the Huskies, I'm guessing they went back on film and took a look at it carefully. That's a good learning lesson for a group that they need to be aware and on a swivel. A lot of open ice on 3-on-3. Huskies fans, some of them slightly disgruntled with the score against a team like St. Thomas. All in all, how did you see night number 1 for the men's team?
A bit sloppy. If I'm going to characterize
for both teams. Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
And I think if you're St. Thomas, I think you have to be happy with one thing. You won the 5-on-5 battle. right? I think, if you're going to be a successful team, and Brett Larson would say this himself, yes, you want to take advantage in special teams, which in game one they did for the most part, but 5-on-5 they were bone dry. So I think overall, it was sort of a game that didn't have a ton of flow to it. Again, you mentioned all the penalty calls, the special teams types of things. So it's, shall we call it like a typical opening day type game, right? Where, it's a lot of, hacking and whacking, and, there's still younger players, and whether it's they're trying to remember the systems, and players who've been on the same team trying to figure each other out a little bit. Again, just kind of sloppy. But overall, not a bad game. Certainly as a Huskies fan, you'd like the W instead of the overtime loss. But at the end of the day, not the worst outcome that you could have. And the Huskies, again, have some work to do. But again, the film, I think, if you can go back to that overtime, it probably didn't take long. You probably didn't need to dissect it too much. And the best part about that is that's fixable. It's very fixable. Again, it's more about, as you mentioned, not chasing the puck carrier, making sure you're always man on man with your guy. And again, if you're caught in space, 1 and 2, you're not essentially in check within your stick, right? That can lead to, like you said, that secondary flow and those open lanes, especially east-west on the rink, especially in 3-on-3 overtime. So overall, not bad, but certainly, not the finish you'd wanted if you were Brett Larson and the Huskies.
What a great second night. The Huskies did make some lineup changes on the forward side. Grant Ashawn, Jack Ryman, Jack Rogers all coming out of the lineup. Couple of centermen flipping as well. Top line stays the same. Kyler Kupka, Mason Salquist, Vieti Miettinen. Second line was Barrett Hall and Zach Okabe, but instead it was Werner Miettinen getting the call in the top 6. Adam Ingram flips to what was the fourth line previously, now third line for night number 2. Joey Molinar and Nick Ports flanking him on either side. And then the fourth unit was an entirely new look. Ryan Rosborough playing left wing, Tyson Gross in the middle, Ethan Aucoin on the right. By the way, Dominic Bassi and Isaac Posh for both games of the weekend, by the way, in case I didn't mention that. We'll get to the goaltending in a second, I'm sure. And then on the defensive side, same pairing as Friday night, Dylan Anhorn, Josh Lidke, no surprise there. Jack Peart, Mason Reiner staying the same. Cooper Wiley and Warren Clark were also together for the weekend. Tynan Ewert was the extra defenseman in night number 1. It was Carl Falk wearing number 2, the extra defenseman on Sunday night. So those were your lineup changes comparatively from Friday to Saturday. Good to see a bit of a healthy mix. Lone goal in this hockey game, the Huskies take home a 1-0 victory to move 1-1 on the season. They were outshot, actually, 33-19 in this one. Actually did not post double digits at any point in the shot column. So a bit of counterintuitiveness for maybe how the Huskies should have had the result on Saturday compared to Sunday. Huskies start the game okay, out shooting St. Thomas 9-6, get outshot 11-8 in period number 2. Those are about par for the course. What I will say is getting outshot 16-2 in period number 3 is
not great.
Yeah, if you want to talk about alarm bells, regardless of the result, that's maybe the most concerning was the finish to that final hockey game. St. Thomas, a great push for them. Both teams combined 0 for 8 on power play opportunities. Faceoffs were about dead even. Huskies have the edge 28 to 27 for wins, losses, respectively. Only goal, Adam Ingram, his first of the season, 10:36 mark, basically halfway through the hockey game in period number 2. Dominic Bassi stops all 33 shots he sees. Aaron Schroeder on the other side stopping 17 of 18. Nick, just for fun here, there was not a Husky that got above 3 shots. Vieti Miettinen was one of those in this hockey game. The other being whom? Any idea? This is an interesting one. It's a forward. I'll give you that much.
Okay.
Which didn't really narrow it down for you at all, but
no, but just based on the lineup and based on what I believe is happening around town, you have to be able to create. So Roseborough's
not a bad guess. He did not have a shot, but it's actually a lower end guy previously in the lineup. Actually, Joey Molinar had 3 shots on goal. So good to see. Dylan Anhorn had 2, as did Zach Okabe. Nick Ports had 2 as well, too. So I think that one of the things that you're starting to see, even when you look at the shot chart on Friday, there's offense being generated from all areas of both the forward group and some of the defensive group too. So I think if they can maybe activate those middle pairing defensemen and the Huskies can bring some more supplemental offense from the back end, I think that maybe that is another step for them as well too. This was kind of a weird hockey game, all things considered. The attendance was 556 in this one. Night previously, of course, was 4,000, just under 4,900 as you switch venues respectively. Nick, Huskies on the road for the first time in a building that doesn't hold much capacity, at least till they get the nice big shiny brand new one headed out there. What did you take away from the second night as the Huskies regroup after the weekend?
So when you look at the lineup changes, right? Especially with like Roseborough coming in, a coin, to me that screamed that essentially Brett Larson wanted a more defensive posture. That's what I believe he really was looking for. Not to say that you want to be able to transition, you want to be able to attack, especially roll four lines. You got to be able to have offense, like you mentioned, generate from, everybody and anybody, especially in today's game of college hockey. But at the same time, I felt like this was more of like, okay, we need to calm things down. We need to take a deep breath. Let's do what we do best. And that is, let's be a little bit more, shall I say, maybe more smart, maybe a little bit more cerebral with what we're doing. And I think it worked, right? I think St. Thomas, with maybe some adrenaline, right? You steal one on the road and now you have an opportunity to get your second ever sweep in the Division I level against a top 10 team coming into the season. And I think Brett Larson just wanted to sort of say, almost control the pace of play a little bit. So I don't mind it. And I think, again, for the Adam Ingram goal, I mean, it was off of a turnover. It was a breakaway goal, beautiful finish to forehand, backhand. So it was, shall I say, opportunistic. So it's nice to see that, this Husky roster can essentially, I don't want to say change on the fly, but it can adapt to what it needs to do to win essentially. And we saw that this Saturday, Sunday. Again, Saturday, a little bit more high flying offense, again, maybe, some, shall we say, first game jitters and whatnot. And then you go right back to work on Sunday, you calm things down, you slow things down, and you just try to pay a little bit more with poise. And I think they did that. So that's what I took away from it. Curious to your thoughts.
Yeah. And to be honest, I like the lineup card from the first night better. Right. But I also felt exactly what you said, is that they were looking for maybe a little bit more veteran presence, just kind of hitting the reset button a little bit. Maybe some young guys that were getting an opportunity, maybe guys that were returners who are getting their first taste in maybe an elevated role. And then you kind of look and say, okay, who do we trust in these spots to maybe kind of reset things a little bit? I thought it was a much more interesting game where I thought St. Cloud had a little bit better effort in some senses on Friday. And I thought, like, offensively, like give and take, I thought that they looked good. Or Friday, you know what I mean, the first night. And then,
my goodness.
Oh, I can't stand these Saturday, Sunday matchups. And they get in the way of football because you know how good the Vikings are, right?
Oh boy.
Yeah, boy.
Let's not go there.
I think week one set the tone for a lot of things there. A couple of games that they probably could have had back. But anyway, I digress. I think St. Cloud, a bit more of a gritty defensive effort. I don't think that's how they want to go through the year. I don't think that they want to play hockey games like that. I think they want to be on their toes. They want to be the aggressor. There's certainly some things to clean up. There's no doubt about that as the Huskies get ready for a matchup against Mankato, and then they take on Fairbanks for their first essentially out-of-state matchup, quote-unquote. It'll be in St. Cloud, but out-of-state as far as opponents are concerned. And a Mankato team that I'm sure they were looking at over the weekend and seeing how they did against an NCHC opponent in Omaha. Nick, it's kind of an interesting mix, I think, for this group. If you're a Huskies fan, I don't think that you should be disappointed with the weekend. I will agree that there's still a lot to be desired because we're early. There's a lot of hiccups. There was a ton of special teams through and through. I mean, you end up having, 8 plus 13? You get 21 total penalties and power plays, not misconduct or anything notwithstanding. So, I mean, it was kind of a weird weekend, all things considered. If you're a Huskies fan, I think what you take away is that early on, they're number 10 in the WCHA polls, number 9 in the USA Hockey and Rink Live polls. People are thinking highly of this team. If anything, I think the Huskies still have a chance to have a really good season. And I think what we take away is that St. Thomas is probably a little bit better than maybe we anticipated coming through the season. I can't wait to listen to Ryan Stieg on MNCAA talk about the Tommies as they maybe kind of try to break over that threshold that we've had the conversation with for quite a while. Kind of final thoughts. If you're a Huskies fan, you're looking back on the weekend and you prepare for a tough test in Mankato, another CCHA opponent.
I think the one thing you want to take away is, again, remember it's one weekend, right? And when you have so many special teams, it's hard to really get to your game. I think, both head coaches would say that special teams, when it becomes, shall we say, the focal point of the hockey game, referee calls here and there's not a lot of flow to the game. You can't really get your forecheck established. There's stops and starts. And so it becomes, shall we say, very, what do you call it, segmented. So at the end of it, you're not loving the loss, and doesn't matter who it is, right? I get it, but also understand two things. St. Thomas has improved. Again, you got to remember that their transfers and their freshmen. I mean, this is now year 3 for Rico. So not only do we have his recruits that are coming on board, but also the transfers that have college hockey experience. This is going to be a good hockey team. So it's not the end of the world. And two, again, for St. Cloud, they turned it back the next night, right? They said, okay, we're obviously a little bit, shall we say, off our game a little bit. So let's, switch it up a little bit. Let's, again, maybe draw back a bit. Not to say we want to be on our heels, but defensively, maybe be a little more sound. And they split the weekend. So again, it wasn't, worst case scenario, certainly wasn't best, but at the end of the day, things to clean up, but things that can be cleaned up. It's not like there's a lack of skill or you were outmatched. There's just some things that you got to, shall we say, execute better on both sides of the puck.
Would agree. Dominic Bassey gets both games last weekend, 121 minutes for him, a 2.48 goals against, and 58 saves on the weekend, a 921 save percentage. So pretty par for the course, all things considered. Good first weekend. Had a shutout to boot as well. Scoring leader for you right now, Vieti Miettinen, the senior forward, has a goal and 2 assists, 3 points for him. Paces the team as well with 12 shots. Next closest is Dylan Anhorn with 7. He has 2 points along with Adam Ingram. And then it's Zach Okabe, brother Werner, Nick Ports, Barrett Hall, Mason Salquist, and Jack Peart rounding out your point getters with a single point each over the course of the first 2 games for the Huskies. Transitioning, Nick, to our final NCHC preview here, coming in at number 2. The St. Cloud State men's team playing at some place called the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, completed in 1989, had some renovations in the mid-2010s. 5,159 is the official capacity, is Olympic sheet, 200 by 100. This team led by Brett Larson, again, coming into the season, 107, 61, and 16 for a 625 winning percentage. Dave Shyak, RJ Anga, and Clark Huster rounding out the coaching crew here, Nick. First of all, maybe we want to start with the coaches, just kind of throwing things out quickly, a bit more of an extensive, if I can say that, crew. Brett Larson, of course, in the middle of his long 7-year contract that will have him here for 10 total. Should he see the life of the contract, I see no reason why he would not. Dave Shyak has been here. I want to say, what season number would this be for Dave? Is it 4 or 5?
It's either.
Let me pull up his bio, because Lord knows that I'm gonna butcher this.
2021, he was with us there, so 2. I think
fourth. Yep, 4th is correct. RJ Anga, of course, moving up essentially in his status, coming over from CC a couple years ago. Now assistant coach, and Clark Huster, kind of bouncing around for his roles, now moving in an elevated opportunity, and then of course. They have their new support staff as well too. So, Nick, starting with the coaching staff, the 4 that we see behind the bench. For the most part here, what does Brett Larson, Dave Shyak, RJ, and Clark Huster bring to the table here?
Experience 1, number 2, great development, and 3, the details, right? It's what you want. And then for Custer and Anga, a little bit more of that, shall I say, younger aspect, sort of that, the ability to connect with younger players. We talked about how when Nick Oliver was part of the staff and how essentially Brett Larson thought that was important to have, someone that was in that role that, regardless of where they were in the coaching staff, someone that, the teammates could essentially look up to, and sort of that role. Again, Cluster was on the 2021 national championship run team, right? So he hasn't been that far removed. So still young at heart, and probably still young in terms of the driver's license number. Definitely not me. I'm well past that. But at the end of it, same thing, right? I think they bring a different perspective, number one, number two, but they all bring a collective, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to play. And they preach the details. They preach the small things, and they preach the execution, right? And we saw again with this last weekend, not to keep beating the dead horse, if they don't like what they see, they have no issue in terms of making changes. So it's a great group. It's a group that challenges each other. It's a group that is also in that same mindset, supportive of one another. It's a great group. It's a great culture. It's an organization you want to play for if you're a Division I hockey player. And again, throughout his tenure here, they've been perennial NCAA contenders every single year. So it's been a wonderful ride, and that's what they bring.
Yeah, absolutely would agree. And I think when you have a coaching staff, again, we remember when Dave Shayak first came in, we kind of talked a little bit about where he was going to be at as far as how he's going to transition from Western Michigan. He'd been a longtime coach with UAA and the Seawolves, and how that was going to translate, and he fit in seamlessly. And I thought, we've alluded to it quite a bit, but, grease pan goals for him. I think that he's a guy that when you have somebody who's been a head coach in a conference like the old WCHA for a long time, granted, didn't have the greatest teams in front of him. That's kind of been a challenge for UAA for a while. But when he knows about trying to get the most out of players that maybe we talked about this, even on St. Cloud's side, they're not getting a lot of A+, A- products. It's a lot of B+ guys that they're going to work through over the long term to transition them into those high-end talents. It maybe takes them an extra year of maturing. Dave Shayak, that's where his expertise comes, is getting players ready in that sense. Of course, the last name that we should mention too, along with the support staff, of course, Sartell native Lenny Hoffman as well, doing director of ops and video coordination for both the men's and women's team. We mentioned him at various points throughout our other previews, so thought we should mention that again as well too. But this St. Cloud team last season, Nick, 25-13-3 overall, 12-9-3 in the conference, went to overtime a total of 8 times, which is again kind of wild to think about. 19-3-1 when they scored first. Much less so when their opponent was on the board for 6-10, but 6 wins when you're down, after the first goal of the hockey game isn't bad. Outshooting and outshot made a okay amount of difference. Outshooting their opponent, they seemed to be more successful, as did they at home. They only lost 4 in regulation, 2 in overtime at home in the 20 games that they played. So, Nick, starting there, this St. Cloud team from last season outscoring their opponents by, what would that be? I want to say 38 goals last season, and outshooting by about 100 to 150. What did you take away from last year? A team that ends up winning their first NCHC Frozen Faceoff. They're finding success in the first round. Played probably one of, if not the best team at the time in the NCAAs to go to the Frozen Four, play a very good hockey game. We're maybe a bounce and a chip away from getting back in that one. How do you look on last season as we already get rolling with 2023, 2024?
Well, let's remember the first half of the year, they earned the number one ranking, right? Anhorn fit in seamlessly, was talk briefly, but possibly being in the Holby Baker conversation with just how well he played, right? Him and Grant Crookshank together, they were point producing machines essentially. So that chemistry there, I asked him about that at Media Day, and he said, yeah, there just seemed to be this natural, sort of just chemistry where they knew where each other was. And, they definitely fed off each other. So you talk about putting all the pieces together, and then Anhorn goes down with an injury, right? And then this team struggled to essentially pick themselves up from that, right? And mind you, not to take away from the rest of the team, right? But what Anhorn brings, that offensive instincts, the footwork, the power play. Again, he was the caliber on the power play in one. A lot was affected by that. Not to mention when it's essentially a non-contact injury. I think it really did resonate through the guys, and it took them a while to figure it out. So then, 7 of 8 was not looking good. We were having conversations that this team is in a bit of it's in trouble. could they even make it out of the NCHC first round? And then they started to find their legs second to last weekend of the regular season. Yep. Then they get to the tourney. They really seem like, okay, we've got this figured out now. Again, as you mentioned, they win the NCHC Frozen Faceoff over Colorado College, which was a nice, I don't want to call it a surprise, but it was a nice change of pace, from the teams that we're used to seeing. And we lauded CC's rise on their end too, right? And how good of a job Chris Mayot's done with them. They again dispatch Mankato in the regional semifinal. They run into a Gopher squad in the regional final, which was going to be a tough test. Again, why 3 Minnesota teams were in the same region? We'll just leave it at that. We'll never know the answer to that. But again, a bounce or two away. I mean, it was 2-1. There was I think a puck that was a Kupka stick or stick.
Yeah, it was on edge. It was right in front of where I was sitting, and it was spinning. And it's like he was on his forehand, but he had almost no angle to the net, and he just missed it by about an inch or two. Yeah.
So you think of what if that puck goes in? I think St. Cloud was in that game until that third goal, that face-off win, and then that rifle from the blue line that seemed to evade Jackson Castor. That was sort of the dagger right there. You could see the Shell would see the air coming out of the lungs per se.
Yeah, but it was St. Cloud's best period of hockey in that third period. They deserve to at least claw back their way back and get to overtime, I think, in that regional game. It is what it is. Overall, though, I think besides the little swoon kind of in the late portions of January into February and March, I think other than that, if you were a Huskies fan, you had to be relatively pleased with how the season played out. I think if they get to a Frozen Four, they have a chance at getting to their second national championship game in what would now be, I think it's 94 years of program history. So, I mean, hard to be disappointed, all things considered. I think it left a bitter taste in your mouth as you moved into the end of the regular season for the NCHC, because this was a team that probably could have finished healthily in second behind Denver. And like you said, was in the running for a while to maybe try to take that Penrose away from DU, and then just suddenly kind of slid down the rock slide a little bit. But Huskies lose 2, gain 2 in the transfer portal. Chase Brand, Brady Zemer, respectively, both headed to Augustana. Augustana did not score last weekend against Wisconsin. Both those guys had a shot in the 2 games that they played. Chase Brand, of course, a graduate player, played in 24 games last season, had 3 goals, 4 assists, 7 points. Brady Zemer, 22 games on the back end in his junior season, did not register a point. On the other side of things, Carl Falk, the defenseman who was the extra skater last night or 2 nights ago, he'll be a junior this year. 31 games for Alaska Fairbanks, had 5 points last year. And then Nick Port's coming over from North Dakota, the local kid, so to speak, also in his junior season. 27 games played, 2 goals, 7 assists, 9 points for the Fighting Hawks. Obviously, love Chase Brand and Brady Zemer, the physicality that they brought, but I kind of want to more focus on Carl Falk and really who we got to see a lot more of this weekend. Nick Port's a guy that you mentioned it yourself. Brad Berry said at NCHC Media Day that St. Cloud was going to love this kid. You think Brett Larson would concur after the weekend?
I think he would. Again, he brings him in as a full, you call him a 200-foot player, right? A guy that's got length, he's got smarts and IQ, still skates really well, but more of that defensive shutdown type winger, right? I know he can play center, but, from what we saw, it looks like he's starting at least on the wing, at least to give it a shot for now. But, was looking, interestingly enough, was looking for an elevated role. And, at least when we look at the line charts, right, with St. Cloud, and again, the coaches would say, well, tell me which line is number 1, right? But what it might indicate, and I think this is what Huskies fans and you and I would hope, is that, if Brett Larson can roll 4 lines, I mean, you go back to the 2021 national title run and that 4th line and how good it was at being that shutdown line. If they truly have a shutdown line like they did, was that Will Hammer, Jared Cockrell, and was that Molinar that was on that 4th line? I think it was Molinar.
He was at the end. I don't think he was at the start, though. I can't remember. I'd have to go.
Solquist? I think it was Solquist.
I'll have to. I can maybe rustle up actually a box score. Yeah.
Either way, if they have that, and I think, you're a more complete team than you were last year, right? And as you mentioned, Brad Berry, Again, very complimentary of Nick Ports. Again, Nick was looking for something a little bit different than he was getting in North Dakota, and happy to be with the Huskies here and again with St. Cloud. So, but if Brett Larson, again, as we mentioned, can, have that top 6, maybe even top 9, that can be that scoring threat, and you just can throw out that fourth line that can win faceoffs. Doesn't matter which zone, right? Can go in there and make, just keep possession of the puck and just allow your top 6 to 9 guys to rest, right? But still be in the offensive zone, create a little bit, and be sort of that grinder type. That's what you're looking for, and Nick Ports can definitely, with him being a more of a seasoned upperclassman, can provide that. And again, when you're a Bradbury coached team, right? You know what you're doing. So I'm complimenting North Dakota. Yes, I know that sounds awful, but no, but true for Nick Ports. He's a great addition to this Husky squad. And I do think, as you mentioned, the Huskies are happy to have him on board and being in the role that he is.
Yeah, certainly would agree. And when you have transfers that come over in conference as well too, you never really know how they're going to shake out depending on the lineup card. You don't know if they're going to suddenly be a more impact player or if they're going to be someone that is maybe going to flounder in the position that you try to put them in. Like you mentioned, Nick, a couple of years ago, a lot of names that it's weird to look at now. It's like, oh, he was a fourth line guy and now he's a high end guy. Jack Johnston would have been in that group, like you mentioned. Joey Molinar would have been someone else. Micah Miller would probably have been in that position at some point too, because that was before the year that he had his breakout season the following year. So, but fourth line's bottom 6. Like I said, I like the lineup card on the first night that the Huskies had a lot better because I think it's a little bit more offensively dynamic, but guys have to be responsible, 200 feet in both directions. I think Brett Larson was looking to kind of rein that in a little bit. Guys who are going to be a little bit more responsible, that are maybe used to, for lack of a better term, and I don't mean this offensively, playing their role, playing a bottom 6 role and being comfortable being that guy. So if you're St. Cloud, again, last season, 10-2 when carrying a lead after the first, 21-2 when carrying a lead after 2 periods of play. When they were tied, they were basically 12-6-3. And then when they were trailing after the first and second, that's when games started to get away from them. So the Huskies, similar formula for success. You score first in hockey games. You are the aggressor. You're the offensive team. Things generally work well for you. 25.5% in the power play last season. PK left a bit to be desired near the tail end of the year, 77%. So I think as we move into this season, I think those trends have continued.
Right.
Looking good on the offensive side, a little bit to clean up defensively. It's early. We're 2 games into the season. St. Thomas probably brought a more formidable challenge than maybe we would have expected potentially. First couple games, you don't know how the new lineup card's going to really roll out. So there's a lot of things at play here, of course. Nick, roster-wise here, 3 goaltenders in this group. Don McBassey gets the start both nights, 6'6", 185 for him in his senior season. Isaac Posh, the freshman, he got the backup call, and then James Gray still listed as a freshman. I'm assuming they redshirted him last season. So
yes,
he'll be with that group as well, too. On the defensive side, Dylan Anhorn in his graduate year part, whatever. He's a 99. He's a January 99. Coming over from Union College a couple of years ago. Expect him to have a great season. Clark, I suppose we should go by class here. So Carl Falk is also a senior. Mason Reiners, Cooper Wiley, both sophomores respectively. Josh Lidke, Jack Peart, your juniors. And then 3 freshmen, Warren Clark and Tynan Ewert, who we saw both of this weekend. The only defenseman we have not seen dress yet this season, freshman Caleb Thiessen, who was a late addition add, 6'5", 210 from Leamington, Ontario. So Nick, again, we talk so much about what you need to be successful in the NCHC. You need a lot of things, in case if you haven't figured that out. One of that is, I would say, having at least a good top 4.
Yes.
Huskies, I feel like, have that.
Yep.
Have the ability to do that. There's one guy in this lineup, Nick, who gets highlighted quite a bit on the back end that would probably be the key cog to this. I don't have to ask because I know what your answer is going to be, but I'll ask for the sake of our listeners who would like to go inside the mind of Nick Maxon. Careful where you look when you're in there.
Right. Might get lost.
Who's the guy in the top 4 that the Huskies are going to really need to have his best season yet in a Huskies uniform?
Jack Peart.
Yep.
And I asked Brett Larson about that. And because we did see a bit of an evolution with Jack Peart, and it happened when Anhorn went down.
Yeah.
And essentially the way that Brett explained it was, he had to be the guy. And this was the guy that, likes to be, again, more of a two-way defenseman, likes to have that good first pass, but, needed to essentially give them another look, right? And that is, hey, joining the rush, to throwing, some offense up, to skating the puck through the middle of the ice and not just leading the rush in terms of a first pass or creating it. Now you're the one that's, being the first horse in line, right? You're just carrying the puck through the middle, getting the blue line, whether it's rooming the puck on the boards, yada, 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 creating, maybe a pass to the either side of the boards to open up some other things. But he did that. And now it's with Anhorn back in the lineup. Can he still do that? And I think that is where you're going to get that depth, right? Again, and we talk about the NCHC, and I think you'd agree with this. The Huskies' top four has both the defensive responsibility that you want, but also the ability to provide offense, right? We know what Anhorn is. He's an absolute beast, especially on the offensive side of the puck. Also very underrated defensively. Jack Peart can be that. If he just can trust his instincts and just go with it and not be afraid to be Anhorn 2.0, essentially, right? And then you've got Josh Lidke there, really good shutdown defenseman, as far as the Jack Peart's other half there as well. So at the end of it, I think St. Cloud's got a great mix in terms of both offense and defense. And I think you and I would agree with this. The real test, it's going to be how does that essentially that bottom pairing do to try to give these top four some rest, especially as you go down to the, later parts of the regular season, then into the playoffs. That's sort of the question mark, but that's kind of where it is. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you're spot on. The only thing I would add is rounding out the top four and probably your fifth defenseman, the two sophomores, Mason Reiners and Cooper Wiley, I think are going to be pivotal to that success as well too. You can deal with a sixth defenseman or an extra defenseman being young, a freshman, somebody learning the ropes, veteran presence like Carl Falk, who we saw dress as the extra D-man, can slot in just fine there. But you got to have four rolling in the NCHC, if not five. Even if you have five defensemen who are solid and reliable in your lineup, you're going to be just fine in this conference. And I think that that's the goal, where the goal is. I would say they've got 3 to 4 right now that you could probably pencil in to say most nights that's what you're going to get, 3 to 4 guys that are going to give you that effort. Now, can you get to 4 to 5 consistently, if not better? So I totally agree. Well said, Nick. On the forward side, 2 graduate forwards that I was going to say join us. They've been there a hot minute. Let's put it that way. Yep. Kyler Kupka and Zach Okabe, good to see those guys back. I don't know if you know this, Nick. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Zach Okabe, he's a guy who brings a buzzsaw-like mentality to the Huskies hockey lineup. Yeah, I don't know. Somebody said that. Somebody not intelligent, clearly, I'm sure. On the senior side of things, Vieti Miatnin and Joey Molinar round out your senior group. Juniors, Mason Salquist. Ryan Roseborough is already a junior, by the way. And I think that's it. Sophomores, there's quite a bit of them. Grant Ashawn, Ethan Acoyne, Adam Ingram, and Jack Rogers. And then freshman Jack Ryman, who I thought looked all right in his first game. Werner Mietnin looked very well in his first freshman game. Barrett Hall, good hockey player. We talked about it. He's from Apple Valley, so at least there's one good hockey player around Huskies Hockey Nation.
That's true. Yeah.
and then Tyson Gross rounding that out. He got his first action on the second night as well. I also forgot to mention Nick Ports in the senior group. I missed him as well too. How could we? We just rambled on about him, the St. Cloud native. So how could we have missed him? But Nick, it's kind of a similar question. For me, it's an entire class of players that I think is going to have to be pivotal for the success of the Huskies. One, are you on the same page with me as far as classes? And furthermore, is there somebody that you look to in addition that's either in that class or not that you think is going to have to step out this year?
It's the sophomore class. I think we both know that, and it's Adam Ingram. Yep. I think it really does, because Ingram can play both center and wing. We saw flashes of his offensive capabilities last year. Granted, I think, again, if you're a coaching staff, you want to see that a little bit more consistently. But that sophomore class, again, it's heavy. And you know what you're going to get out of your upperclassmen, right? You're going to always get, the details. We're going to get from Kupka and Okabe, Nick Ports. But the sophomore class, right? Can they continue to essentially build on what they were last year at the end of the season? Can you not regress? And then more so, can you essentially just take it up another level, right? And I think Adam Ingram is the catalyst for that. And as you mentioned, that whole sophomore class is going to be pivotal, right? If they are able to do what we hope they will do, this is a very stacked and dangerous lineup for St. Cloud. It really, really is. And I think there's a good balance. We talked about that before between skill, speed, defensive reliability. I think, there's a couple of different ways that Brett Larson can put out a roster that looks a little bit different to try to accomplish different things. We'll put it that way, right? We know how St. Cloud wants to play and what their identity wants to be. But again, that sophomore class, again, a lot of bodies that have to contribute. But again, if Adam Ingram can be that guy and be the one that sort of takes the reins to be the head of the sophomore class, to me, that spells good news for St. Cloud as, again, you start to see that wave of babies, most of them gone. We talked about the losses of Jami Kranila, right, on the forward, and he's now playing over in Finland for his pro career. And then you talk about in the back end, a couple of guys like Bushy, Spencer Meyer, right, guys that go on. But this is where, your second-year guys have to step up and fill those roles, which there's some elevated roles there. Yeah. Again, Barrett Hall was slotted in as a top 6 as a freshman. So there is opportunity there. And it's not going to be up to them to try to fill those gaps, because if they can, good things on the horizon for the Huskies.
Huskies return 6 of their top 8 scorers from last season. They lose their top 2. Jami Kranila had 40. Grant Cruikshank had 38, like you mentioned. Zach Okabe, Vieti Miet in return. They both had 36 last year. And then Kyler Kupka, Dylan Anhorn, 25 apiece. Jack Peart had 24. Don't forget, he is offensively productive. We talked about his growth. Adam Ingram had 23 points before Micah Miller and Aiden Spellacy rounding out your top 10 from last season. Nick, there's one more guy I want to highlight before we move on to the schedule and things here. And that is a player who had 7 points last season. He's a junior this year. We mentioned him a little bit. He was in an elevated role both nights. I'd like to see a little bit more of Mason Solquist. I think this is here also his year that he can kind of develop and be a true top 6 guy. I would say maybe a Patrice Bergeron-esque type guy with a little bit more nasty to his game, I think is probably where I would kind of put him in that realm. So I'm curious to see what he does. Of course, coming in technically 5'8", 165, I would imagine he weighs much more than that now. I don't know how old this stat card is. So, but I mean, 5'8", I mean, not the biggest guy, so has to play a lot bigger than his size. We hear that phrase often, but I think he brings, like you said, that bulldog-like mentality now to see if he can bring some offensive punch and good 200-foot presence. And you got to win some face-off draws, in the middle as well too. If you're going to be a top 6 centerman, you got to be successful like a top 6 centerman should be. So, Nick, as far as schedule is concerned, the Huskies 1-1 in the season. They lose 5-4, like we mentioned, in overtime on Saturday. They win 1-0 on Sunday. Yesterday, at the time of recording, this weekend, Friday, Saturday, they travel for both games in Mankato, their first full road game swing weekend of the season, before coming back to face Alaska on the 20th and 21st to round out the month of October. They actually have a week off at the tail end of October around Halloween. Spooky or not, they'll get Miami to start their NCHC matchups in the month of November at home. They travel immediately to Kalamazoo that following week. That's a big test early.
Yep.
And then they've got Duluth at home. And then over the holidays, Thanksgiving, non-conference game at home against Michigan. So November is going to be an interesting month as we slide through there. Omaha, who has had Mankato last weekend, they travel to Baxter Arena, do the Huskies the 8th and 9th of December to round out the first half of the season. So St. Thomas, they just played. Mankato, Fairbanks, Miami, Western, Duluth, Michigan, Omaha to round out the first half of the season. What do you think?
It's a tough test, right? And again, non-conference, we've seen how even last year, right? If you can get out of your non-conference with a good record, how impactful that can be, especially in pairwise as we go through the year. I think last year, as the Huskies were struggling a bit, that was the non-conference record that was essentially kind of buoying them a little bit, before obviously getting essentially the auto bid from winning the NCHC Frozen Face-Off. But if you're Brett Larson, this is exactly what you want, right? You want an early test. You want to get the guys going. He said that before. He doesn't like, shall we say, giving them softballs. I know he doesn't say that directly, right? But he likes the good challenges. He wants this team up and running early. And Michigan will be another really good test again, another Big Ten school that has got a lot of high flying talent. So this will be a really good defensive, shall we say, measuring stick for them. And more so offensively, can they push back a bit, right? November is going to be tough because they have they play a week, then they have a week off, and they play a week, then they have a week off. So November is kind of goofy. But I think that's a change from years past, right, where they had a bye week towards February/March. And I think what he wants instead this year is to have this team rolling through the second half of the year. He doesn't want that break. He wants this team to continue to play. So if they can get through November and they get into the holiday break on a good note, they'll be all right. And again, can you keep as many people healthy as you can? Obviously, that's big. But at the end of it, I like the schedule. Again, it's tough. That's the way I would like to see the Huskies play it. But also going to have to deal with some, shall we say, some little kinks in the schedule there. Again, with especially November, only playing 2 weekends out of 4. So at the end of it, I like it. See how the Huskies do.
Other way around. It's actually, so they have, before they hit November, their last weekend in October, they're off. They play all weekends of November, 2 weeks off in December, and their next bye week actually comes in the middle of February. It'll actually be the tail end, kind of like the 16th and 17th, somewhere 14th, 15th, whatever that weekend is. They'll play then. But yes, November is going to be a very pivotal month, I think, for this group. You've got 6 of 8 of your matchups are in conference, and then you finish December, the first half against Omaha. Last non-conference schedule will be the 29th and 31st. So Friday, Sunday, in Bemidji, and then at home against Bemidji for your non-conference. Pretty prototypical. It's either at the beginning of the year or during the holidays they end up facing the Beavers. And then January, they actually have a week off to start January too before they get back into school. They travel to Magnus Arena, Denver, the 12th and 13th. They play DU, and then they come home for 4 straight, North Dakota and Omaha respectively. Only time the Huskies see Colorado College is actually February 2nd and 3rd at Ed Robeson Arena in CC. Miami, they are on the road following weekend in Miami as well, the 9th and 10th, and then at home against Western Michigan and Denver again before rounding out the season on the road, Amsoil Arena, March 8th and 9th, a bit later this season in Duluth to round out. So it is Colorado College and North Dakota are the only 2 teams that the Huskies only see one time. Next second half, pretty prototypical NCHC schedule. I would say relatively favorable, though. You've got Denver and North Dakota. Denver is going to be a tough challenge. North Dakota, it's anyone's guess as to where they're going to be at that point. Omaha should be a test. CC, test, but I mean, if you play well, you have a chance to at least go 500, if not better, which is great from a Tigers perspective to say that conversation that they're not an easy mark on paper. Miami, you hope. Western Michigan and Denver will be a challenge, and Duluth is always the coup de grace at the end of the regular season. Nick, do you like the second half?
Yeah, again, NCHC, you ask every coach and you ask the players, right? It's every game is meaningful. Every opponent has got good talent. It is playoff hockey essentially throughout the regular season. It's tough. It's a tough conference to win in. So you don't want it any other way. And for St. Cloud, again, get out of the holiday break, get into a groove early. Again, you got 2 tough tests again on the road where the Huskies, have not, shall we say, been, great on the record keeps in Magnus Arena. But then with North Dakota, again, as you mentioned, who knows what they're going to be. I think they're going to be all right. But at the end of it, tough schedule. And then you get right into the NCHC playoffs. And then hopefully, and I think there is a good shot at this, the Huskies go on again to the NCAA tournament to hopefully make some noise. But again, every game is crucial, especially when you get to conference play, because we saw how tight it was last year. Throughout our other previews, Noah, 6 through 2, essentially, and you could maybe even argue 7. There is a lot of room for, shall we say, musical chairs, if you want to call it, in the standings. So you got to, get the points where you can, and there's going to be no games off. So I'm excited for it. Again, every year in the NCHC, being able to cover this team and all the other teams is always a privilege because of just how good these teams really are. And even more so getting an opportunity to kind of be around the coaches, the players, and whatnot. It's always something that I look forward to. So can't wait.
Yeah. Final 2 things here for hilarity. To be technical, The pairwise is technically out. There are 8 teams tied for first, one of those being Denver in the NCHC. Miami's tied for 10th. St. Cloud is at 14 right now, in case anyone was curious. We'll keep an eye on that to see how that develops throughout the season. As far as the polls, like we mentioned, St. Cloud coming in at 10 for USCHO. In order, if you want to talk pairwise standings here, Nick, and maybe top 20, because that's what it is. We'll go from 20 backwards. UConn, Northeastern, Penn State, Duluth, and Harvard are 20 through 16. Your next 5 are Merrimack, OSU.
Has Harvard played a game yet, though?
No, they have not.
That's usually the case.
Yeah. It's the mathematics. It's that Ivy League mathematics, in case you didn't know. Merrimack, Ohio State, Providence, Western, and Cornell round out your teams outside the top 10. St. Cloud is exactly at 10. Then Michigan Tech, Michigan State, North Dakota is at 7, according to the preseason poll. Somebody must know something about North Dakota that we don't know.
Well, Harvard's controlling it, right? It's called quantitative easing. That's whatever the heck it is. It's advanced analytics.
I'd say those are words that I don't understand. What I do know is Michigan's at 6, and the Huskies play them this year. Quinnipiac, the defending national champions, at 5, and then BC, Denver, Minnesota, and BU respectively round out the poll. BU had 26 first place votes, Minnesota with 18, Denver with 4, and BC with 2 to round out your first place grouping. But the final question here, Nick, first of all, before we want to know how we feel our St. Cloud State Huskies are going to find success in the NCHC, if you're a casual fan, you're looking for some photos, you go to HuskiesIllustrated.com for some great photos of your Huskies. But if you're looking for some news, Nick, is there a particular place that you'd like to visit if you're looking for some great men's and women's recaps if you go back to last weekend?
It's centerSU.com.
Great place. Very, very awesome couple of recaps from the website this past week. So centerSU.com, your home for all things St. Cloud hockey. Of course, MNCAA, hopefully back in action here for the Soda Pod in all its glory here as we move forward. Soda Pod, great sponsor of the Huskies Warming House podcast. Your place to stay wild and up to date with all things in the state of hockey. Of course, when this show comes out, it'll be on Tuesday, the start of the NHL regular season. So the Minnesota Wild get rolling soon thereafter. But Nick, the St. Cloud State Huskies, final question. They have a gauntlet as usual in the NCHC. We have them picked to finish number 2. How will they finish in that spot or higher? What do they have to do?
They just have to be consistent, right? I think that's, I mean, it sounds easy, right? But it's not, right? This conference is, you mentioned a gauntlet. It's a war zone. It really is. And that's a compliment to all 8 NCHC teams. The last time we'll be able to say it's 8. And then Arizona State comes in next year to make it 9, which is going to throw a whole bunch of fun into the game, I think. But for St. Cloud, again, you got to, for the veterans, you got to lead with the veterans. You got to have some rising stars from the sophomore group. We talked about it before. You got to get stellar goaltending. Again, Dominic Bassi, I think some people would argue, we didn't touch on this earlier, and I'll just make a comment on it, that he didn't look very comfortable in game number 1. I think he settled down in game number 2. Again, it's here. I didn't see a ton of the clips. At the end of it, I think St. Thomas just played all right. No big deal.
Yeah, I would say to that point, a lot of net mouth scrums and second and third chance opportunities for both teams. It seemed like a lot of pucks being filtered towards the net and then chaos all around the crease. I would say if I had to rate Dominic Bassi's play on a scale of 0 to 10, because we love picking on our goaltenders, right? I would give him a 7 on the weekend. I don't think it was exceptional, but I think he made generally the saves that he had to, or made the initial save. And the times that he didn't, it was a rebound, he was hung out to dry, or it was just a puck that found through bodies. I don't think, besides maybe a goal or 2 on the weekend, I don't think that there was anything where you went, wow, he probably should have had that back. So all in all, first weekend of the season, I think you have to be pleased with both his play and the Huskies. They got through it. They're 500, and they pushed the first game that they lost to overtime. I would say, as a St. Cloud State fan, wait and see, feel good about it. And if you get a chance to travel to Mankato next weekend, I would. Yeah,
absolutely. Mankato, again, kind of I don't want to say a wild card, but, sort of, right? Where I'm not sure it's as big of a drop as even their own fans think it's going to be. Because again, as a head coach, coming over from Ohio State, at the end of it, I don't think that Strand is going to be changing the wheel that much, right? I don't think you can.
Yeah.
And Mankato is built from the goaltending out, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's going to be so hard. I mean, with Dryden McKay in his 12th season, I mean, they're going to be. Oh, wait, sorry, he's gone. Oh, never mind.
He's been gone for a while. Anyway, but no, travel down to Mankato again. Show the support for the Huskies. It's a easy drive again, right down 169, and again a nice barn to enjoy a college hockey game and the surrounding area as well down in Mankato. So support the Cardinal in black, as you want to say, and again these non-conference type games, especially with Mankato, have been good matchups in the past. I don't expect anything less this upcoming weekend. So if you're Huskies fans, again, get out and support the Huskies, whether they're at home or on the road, because again, this team is going to be already a top 10 team to watch. And we do think that they're only going to get better from here.
Yeah, it should be good. They play the Wisconsin Badger the Mankato Mavericks. Was that too on the nose? I'm sorry. It'll be good. It'll be a good test. Normally, we've seen this series in certain years be home and home. This one, of course, they'll be on the road again to take on Mankato. So it should be good. I'm excited. I'm excited for this group. There's a lot of promise in the forward group. Defensively, they're only going to get better, and Dominic Bassi, I think, will be just fine. So it's going to be a great season. We'll be here on the Huskies Warming House podcast, of course, to cover it all. Next week, we'll essentially be in full swing. We'll basically be doing WCHA recap, take a look at the women's team. We'll take a brief overview of college hockey on the men's side because it's a little easier to get the scope of things outside the NCHC. Then we'll talk about the NCHC, the men's program, and maybe as we get deeper into the season, we'll take a look at the pairwise to round out the show. So just giving you kind of an idea as things go through. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.